Mr. Chairman, thank you. I rise in favor of my Amendment 22 to H.R. 8771, which prohibits funding for the United Nations International Organization for Migration, or IOM, activities in the Western Hemisphere. What's at stake with this amendment is twofold: ending the channels connecting the U.S. taxpayer dollars to activities facilitating mass migration to the southern border, and reclaiming Congress's control over the allocation of funding. The underlying bill allocates $2.4 billion for migration and refugee assistance to carry out Section 2A and 2B of the Migration and Refugee Assistance Act, which allows for membership and contributions for IOM and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Congress broadly allocates this pot of money for these purposes, and then the State Department and USAID have the discretion to allocate these funds as they see fit. While this process alone should raise concern about the Appropriations Authority, we should be even more concerned that this system is helping the IOM, which is facilitating mass illegal migration, creating the crisis at our southern border. We have uncovered the fact that the IOM is using contributions from countries, including the United States, to lobby the Biden administration to repeal and replace policies that secure the southern border, and who also engage in activities providing assistance that facilitate mass migration to that same border. Shortly after President Biden took office, IOM issued a statement in support of his executive orders, which set this administration off on its destructive border and immigration agenda. The IOM has also risen in support of the Biden administration's creation of unlawful categorical parole categories, the kind this body impeached Secretary Mayorkas for, and continued to criticize the U.S. for keeping Title 42 restrictions in place. The IOM also pressured the Biden administration to end the Remain in Mexico policy, which it considers, quote, inhumane and against international law. But of the most concern is how U.S. taxpayer dollars provided to the IOM are then being provided directly to illegal migrants, facilitating the mass migration to our southern border, causing this problem. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and with that I reserve. To add insult to injury, U.S. dollars provided to the UN are also sent to NGOs, which use these funds to provide cash, debit cards, food, clothing, medical treatment, shelter, and even, quote, humanitarian transportation to U.S.-bound illegal immigrants in Latin American nations and Mexico. In short, U.S. taxpayer dollars are being sent over our borders to the IOM, which is then using them to facilitate the crisis at our border. The IOM is using U.S. taxpayer dollars to push our government to lower its border security policies, and then aiding in programs rushing illegal migrants to the border, overwhelming the system in place, and helping facilitate the crisis we are facing. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment, and with that I reserve. This amendment does not harm the United States' ability to help refugees as if it so desires. First, it keeps in place U.S. funding for IOM activities in other regions where there are refugee crises. It simply blocks U.S. funding for activities in the Western Hemisphere, which are harming our own border security. Second, if the United States wants to provide refugee services, it should do so directly, not rely on international organizations to administer these services. And to the extent that the U.S. does want to engage with international organizations, this does not mean it should not review how its funds are used and whether the organization is operating in the best interests of the United States. In this instance, the IOM is not, and the U.S. should not be complicit in bad policies that harm our country. With that, I yield back.